Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads, where we are continuing in the historical fiction, The Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. I've noticed that I'm doing an awful lot of review of the last video, and you can just watch the last video. I don't need to waste all that time. So we'll do a very quick recap. So in the last video, we still had Zoe, Wolfgang, and Ariel having a chat. They talked about Hitler. They talked about Monte Cassino Cathedral. They talked about, I can't find it here, Caspar Hauser and the way he passed away. They talked about a centaur represented by Sagittarius. And they talked about, quite simply, the power of life after death. Now, they did mention Caspar, not Caspar Hauser, but one of the three kings to take gifts to Jesus as a young child was Caspar, who gave incense. And so this title, I don't know if this is where we're going, but this section is titled The Messenger. So let's see what this one says. All right. The belief of the Thracians in their immortality takes the following form. Every 5 years, they choose one of their number by lot and send him to Zalmoxis as a messenger to ask for whatever they want. Some of them hold javelins with spear tips pointed upward, while others take hold of the messenger's hands and feet and swing him aloft onto the points. If he is killed, they believe that the god regards them with favor. But if he lives, they blame his own bad character and send another messenger in his place. Ugh. I've heard a different account from the Greeks. Zalmoxis was a man and lived in Samos, where he was a slave in the household of Pythagoras. After gaining his freedom and amassing a fortune, he returned to his native Thrace, where he entertained the leading men and taught them that neither he nor they nor any of their descendants would ever die. And that's written by Herodotus in the book or manuscript, The Histories. And then a different one. And those of the disciples who escaped the conflagration were Lytus and Archippos and Zalmoxis, the slave of Pythagoras, who is said to have taught the Pythagorean philosophy to the Druids among the Celts. And that is by Hippolytus, Bishop of Romus, Porto, in his writing Philosophemina. And then we say, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And that's out of the book of Job, the Bible, 1, 15, 16, 17, and 19. All right. Oh, okay. So we're back to that time. We are now in Camulodunum, Britannia, spring AD 60. And this is Fractio. Jesus took bread and blessed it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks, saying, "Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood." Matthew 26, 26 through 28. And in this mountain shall the Lord of hosts make unto all people a feast of fat things, a feast of wines on the lees, of fat things full of marrow, of wines on the lees well refined. And he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people. and the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death. And that is also from the Bible, the book of Isaiah 25, verses 6 through 8. All right. AD 60. The grass spread beneath her was a thick carpet of rich emerald green that soothed her soul after long, hard winter under the Roman yoke. She stood tall and proud in the wicker chariot perched high on the grassy knoll. Holding the reins lightly between her fingers, her wild red hair lifted from her broad shoulders and tumbling to billow about her waist in the early morning breeze. This past year had been far worse than the previous 15 years since the Roman occupation, for the young Emperor Nero had proved far greedier than his stepfather, Claudius, whom the rumors said Nero himself had poisoned. Now, native Britons were being brutally dispossessed by floods of opportunistic Roman colonists, backed up by garrisons of legendary troops. Legionary, probably, troops. Only a few months ago, when her husband died, she herself, proud queen of royal blood of the house of Iceni, and her two young daughters, had been, okay, mistreated by the Roman soldiers. Her vast holdings of land were seized on behalf of the Emperor Nero, and her family's wealth and treasured possessions, as with those of so many others, carted off to Rome. But despite these tragedies, she knew she had fared better than many others. Britons were everywhere being captured and sold into chain gangs to build Roman towns, Roman garrisons, Roman aqueducts, Roman roads. What was the choice now left them, really, as Britons? Only liberty or death. When her daughters, with her daughters beside her in the chariot, as the horses stamped the turf and blew air through their nostrils, she stood in silence, surveying the throngs below, all massed there in a broad circle around the borders of the vast open field, all gazing up at her, all waiting for what she would do. When at last they fell silent, she knotted the reins on the pommel and opened the folds of her mighty colored tunic. She lifted out the rabbit and held the creature high above her head for all to see. It was a snow white sacred hare, bred and raised by the Druids precisely for this purpose. From the 80,000 men, women, and children thronged there on the green, not a single breath was heard. Only the whinnying of a horse broke the endless silence. Then she released the hare. At first, the animal sat there on the grassy knoll in stunned confusion as thousands of humans stood below, planted like forests of stone, waiting in silence. Then it pelted in a wild burst down the knoll and made a beeline across the open field, a small white blur against a drop cloth of green. The direction it ran was southwest, away from the sun. And when the crowds saw it, with one voice, they burst into a warlike scream of cheers, tossing their tartans into the air like a blizzard of plaids from the sky. For they had seen that the prophetic hare had dashed straight in the direction of Camalodunum. Boudicca's armies that were gathered here could reach it on a fast march by nightfall. And by dawn, 16 years of abuses against the Britons and their land would be washed away in, I'm not going to use these words. Roman blood. Look. All right, where are we? 10 minutes. Let's see what else we got here. 10 minutes. Oh, we got a little bit of a stopping spot. Okay, we'll go. So now we're still in 8060. Mona Island, Britannia. Consignatio. Here at the world's end, on its last inch of liberty, we have lived unmolested in this day, defended by our remoteness and obscurity. Now the farthest reaches of Britain lie exposed. Nothing but sea and rock and hostile Romans whose arrogance you can't fool by compliance or modest self-restraint. Predators of the world, neither east nor west has satiated them. To plunder, butcher, steal, these things they falsely name empire. They've turned the world into a wasteland, and they call it peace. And that was written by Tacitus in Agricola, quoting British chieftain Calgacus on the Romans. It is the primary right of men to die and kill for the land they live in, and to punish with exceptional severity all members of their own race who have warmed their hands at the invader's hearth. And that is Winston Churchill at the History of English-Speaking Peoples. It wasn't merely a question of achieving short-term control or submission among the natives, as Suetonius Paulinus well knew. He'd begun his career at the Atlas Mountains, putting down uprisings by the Berbers against Roman occupation. Having weathered many such campaigns, Suetonius was well prepared to wage warfare over difficult terrain or to meet fierce, hot opposition in hand-to-hand combat. But in the 2 years since the Emperor Nero had appointed him governor of Britannia, Suetonius had come to understand that these Druids were something else. As both rulers and seers, whether male or female, they held the highest priestly offices in the land and were regarded by their people nearly as gods. Suetonius knew without question that in the long run, there was only one way to deal with them. They had to be utterly destroyed. Their chief sanctuary was located just off the coast of Cambria on the Isle of Mona, the cow, a nickname for Brigde, a Demeter-like moon goddess in Basundidi. I don't know. They believed they were protected by this goddess. The cow, a nickname for Brigde is the goddess, I guess. And that their warriors who were slain in battle, would be rejuvenated from her cauldron of rebirth. Yeah, we heard that a little bit earlier. The underground passage to the cauldron was located beneath a lake that lay near Mona's sacred grove. It had taken Suetonius Paulinus 2 years of stealth and trickery to determine exactly when was the most propitious moment to strike at this offshore stronghold, without a chance of defense or retreat. At last, he learned that all the principal Druidical priests were present each year on the first day of the Roman month of May. This was the day the Celts called Beltane, for the tane or fires they lit the night before to cleanse and purify the sacred woods in preparation for the Great Mother's yearly visit to usher in the month of fertility. This was the holiest day of the year, when the Druids neither worked nor bore arms, and therefore Suetonius could hope the day would be very least be anticipating an attack. He had a flotilla of flat-bottomed boats built to bring his troops across the Nero, but often violent, straight from the mainland. At dusk on May Eve, they crept through the sea foam, rounding the coast along the southern tip of the island for a landing away from the mainland in the west at Holy Head. Holy Head. There, as their boats slipped soundlessly in towards shore, the ceremonies of the cleansing ritual were already underway, though it was not yet dark. Shadowy figures bearing flaming torches moved through the silent groves that ran the length of the strand. The sun was slowly sinking into the blood-red sea as the Roman troops beached their craft and splashed through the sweeping surf. But all at once, they halted at the sight that confronted them. A mass of people, all in robes of deathly black, came onto the beach, advancing like an implacable black-clad wall of human flesh. The male priests moved with their arms raised to the heavens, screaming curses and oaths at the top of their lungs. The women, with wild, disheveled hair, flitted among them like insects, with torches held aloft. Then, in a sudden wave, the women rushed, shrieking like furies across the pebbled beach, directly towards the Roman soldiers. Guess they didn't sneak up on them. Suetonius's officers looked on helplessly as their troops stood motionless on the beachhead, overawed, paralyzed by that band of howling harpies that seemed straight from Hades. Suetonius ran down the lines between them as the crazed women rushed onward. He screamed commands and imprecations to the troops above the deafening racket of the Druids, until at last his officers collected themselves and began to follow his example. Cut them down, the command ran down the ranks. Those shrieking women with flaming torches bore down upon them still, with the screams of the mad Druid priests resounding in their ears. At the last possible instant, the soldiers charged. And that is a natural stopping spot, so we're going to stop there. All right. These videos, this book, the whole book is just full of so much information. All right. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm finding it very interesting. But remember, it is a historical fiction. All right, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Well, maybe tomorrow, but I won't be posting for another couple days. All right. Have a great day.